The message I have to share with you today is really more of an invitation, as I believe that this passage makes the most sense when we invite ourselves into the narrative of lament. I am sure that when hearing this text, most people would agree with me that it is difficult. Maybe it raises many questions for us, questions about suffering in this world, questions about idolatry, what that might look like in a modern age, and maybe even some questions about God's anger. Feel free to hold on to those questions and wrestle with them this morning as you listen to what I have to share. Over the past few months, since I've joined St. Paul's, we have heard some wonderful and inspiring messages about what we can do for our neighbors and communities. We have been reminded about the impact we can make as individuals and as a church on our neighborhoods and our neighbors. And I deeply appreciate these messages, as I'm sure many of us here do. Yes, and amen to all of these good words of empowerment, of asking for change and improving our neighborhoods, and for generally helping those who are counted as least among us in society. But I think that equally important is to all of this is this practice of lament. What does it mean that here in verse 20, God's people of Israel are crying out, saying in paraphrase, I should say, we finished harvesting all the crops. We've been putting in hard work and long days all summer. Where is our celebratory feast? Where is our reward for our labor? Where is our rest from the daily toil and hard work of harvest? Now, obviously, Ballard is not a community with a lot of that is centered around this harvest season, but it's not hard to imagine that for the Israelites in the ancient Near East, who had formed an agrarian farming society, that the whole year revolved around the harvest season, with folks planting and tending to crops all spring so that they could hopefully have a bountiful harvest in the summer and enough food to store and jar and pickle for the coming fall and winter months. But if you would like to take me up on this invitation into the text, then it's important to note that usually at the end of a harvest season in Israelite society, there were feasts and celebrations and bountiful meals as the hard work was over, and society could rest a little easier knowing that they had a whole winter's worth of food to keep everyone supplied and happy. I am sure that each harvest season there was uncertainty about the yield being enough to last the year, but it's based on the voices here in the text. It seems that there was an expectation that their work would yield the crop they needed, and that they would be able to have their end of harvest feasts as usual. But in this case, despite the Israelites' work, God did not provide the crops they needed. Some modern day renditions of this plea might sound like, hey, I went to school, I got good grades, I even went through college. Why do I still feel like there is no place in the world for me? Or maybe, I raised my kids, I always did my best to love them, give them what they need, and provide for them in this world. Why did things have to turn out like this? Similar to the Israelites, who at times might have grown accustomed to a bountiful harvest, we have societal scripts, I'll call them, I suppose, that tell us that when we do X, then we get Y in reward. We hear things like, work hard and save your money so you can have money to live on in retirement. But we don't quite as often show the limelight on the families whose medical expenses prevent that as a possibility entirely. Not to mention the folks who only make enough to afford the basic necessities of life, let alone setting aside savings. At risk of painting with too broad a brush, I feel that in American society, we are averse to acknowledging the ways in which the promises that society subtly puts into our heads as we grow up and live here are not fulfilled. Again, I'm speaking broadly as there are many pockets and communities in which this is not the case, but I think we generally don't like to recognize it because it breaks down the facade that as long as we continue to work and toil, then we will receive what is promised to us. Up to this point, some might think I've been a little pessimistic, but my purpose for being here today is not to simply remind us of the ways that we have been let down in life. No, My wish today is to invite us collectively into this narrative of lament. And when I say narrative of lament, what I'm talking about is a worldview and a daily rhythm that incorporates lament into the fabric of our daily life. That we do not live in a way that minimizes, explains away, or overlooks the ways in which people face suffering in difficult circumstances. When we hear the stories of our neighbors and when we look back on our own life, it can sometimes be easier and more comfortable to tell ourselves, that's just the way it is, and move on. I think that the societal scripts are so powerful at times that it becomes easier to ignore when an individual is let down and write it off as a matter of their personal failing. That this is exactly how the false narrative that our houseless neighbors, that they're in that position because it was something they did wrong or something that they were unable to accomplish. But in reality, it's the societal structures that have caused them to be there. And we know that here at St. Paul's. So what am I asking of you this morning? I'm asking that we continue to live into a narrative of lament that incorporates our suffering and the suffering of others into the very fabric of the story, not just the fringes. And more than just an acknowledgement or recognition, but through daily ritual and daily life practices. I love that here at St. Paul's, we have the tradition of lighting the community candle as we lift up our prayers and often our lamentations. And it is not lost on me that St. Paul's is definitely a community in which people indeed share their lamentations. And I love that. But I love the candle lighting because it involves physical embodiment of our lamentations and our griefs and our sorrows. And our joys and hopes, of course. As a hospice chaplain, I sometimes find myself caring for a patient that has undergone so much suffering and injustice throughout their life that I find myself not able to let go of them after they pass on. So eventually, I write their name down on a piece of paper, or maybe even a rock, and I talk to it. I tell it about why it's difficult for me to let the patient go. And when I'm done talking, I simply sit with the object until I feel ready to set it aside. Or if it's a rock, maybe I throw it into the lake outside my house. When doing this, I do not forget my patients or their stories. But due to healthcare privacy laws, I simply can't share their stories in a group setting. So I do what works for me to honor my patients' narratives of lament. So I invite you this morning to do the same. Find out what works for you in physically embodying your lamentations, sharing in a group, and finding support in a way that is incredibly necessary. And I don't mean to say we shouldn't be doing that, but incorporating a ritual or a practice into your life, whether it's one that you're familiar with, have been taught about, or one that you come to find on your own, where you are regularly able to express your lament, is important and goes hand in hand with the wonderful work that St. Paul's is doing for the community. I ask you this morning to accept the invitation I have given and live into the narrative of lament just as the Israelites did. Please listen as I read In My Craft or Sullen Art by Dylan Thomas. It is a modern day poem of lament that will hopefully provide some inspiration for us today. In my craft or sullen art, exercised in the still night, when only the moon rages and the lovers lie abed with all their griefs in their arms, I labor by singing light, not for ambition or bread or the strut and trade of charms on the ivory stage, but for the common wages of the most sacred heart. Not for the proud man apart from the raging moon I write on these spindrift pages, nor for the towering dead with their nightingales and psalms, but for the lovers, their arms round the griefs of the ages, who pay no praise or wages, nor heed my craft or art. Thank you.